Hello, my name's Will Tanner. I run a think tank called Onward, which I set up a few years ago, partly to develop policy that better reflects and better delivers for the everyday concerns of ordinary people, rather than the ideological theories or the bureaucratic whims which, let's face it, tend to pervade in Whitehall. And nowhere is this gap between voters and Parliament more obvious than in the social fabric of communities. While politicians have tended to focus on the national, the economic, the transactional, voters increasingly seem to demand something a bit more local, social, and relational. If you go to Grimsby or Workington and talk to people there, you'll hear that people don't tend to want to talk about GDP. They want to talk about the slow decaying of their high street, the quality of their local public services, the number of good, stable, skilled jobs available for them and their families. This is what I call the agenda of the politics of belonging, a new political movement based on giving people more power, more capital, and more pride in their community and place. And I think it's long overdue. Today, over 7 in 10 people believe that community has declined in their lifetime. And they're probably right. The civic institutions that historically have sustained our communities are disappearing from the places that we love. In the last 20 years alone, 1 in every 4 pubs has called last orders for the last time. 1 in every 4 libraries has lent its last book. And it's not just that the institutions are going, we as people are becoming less associational too. On average, we're less likely to be a member of a local group than we were at the turn of the millennium. We're less likely to be a member of a trade union. We're much less likely to attend church. Volunteering is in decline, especially amongst younger generations. And on top of all of this, perhaps because of it, the social norms which hold society together seem to have less influence today than they did just a few decades ago. We are less generous with our money to charity. And before the pandemic, we were less generous with the quality time that we spent with our families too. We vote less, and we trust our political and government institutions less too. We are, in the words of Professor Bob Putnam, bowling alone. And the worst part is that the social fabric is fraying in some places faster than others. Last year, Onward created what we call the Social Fabric Index to comprehensively estimate the strength of community in every part of the United Kingdom. And the results, I think, go quite a long way to explaining the volatility, the kind of vitriol of our politics in recent years. We find that the places with the strongest social fabric, the strongest community, are typically located in the south of England, especially in London's rural commuter belt and parts of Scotland. Richmond upon Thames is the highest ranked area by social fabric according to our index. Chiltern, South Oxfordshire, South Cambridgeshire all follow quite closely behind. Meanwhile, the places where the social fabric is fraying are typically found in the kind of post-industrial and coastal areas of England and Wales. Places along the eastern coast, in South Wales, the M62 corridor from Huddersfield to Grimsby. These are the places where the social fabric is fraying. You will have already seen the pattern. Places which have a fraying social fabric are much more likely to have suffered from deindustrialization in the last few decades. They're much more likely to have voted for Brexit. And they're much more likely to be in a red wall constituency that switched from Labour to the Conservatives at the last election. This is why I talk about repairing the social fabric of our community being the single most important political challenge of our time, the thing that politicians need to grapple with above all else. But how can it be achieved, given the intransigence of the issue in the past? My view is that we can't just focus on giving people more rights and more powers, which is typically what the centre-right has historically done. Think of the big society. And we can't just concentrate on giving people more money either, which is historically the playbook favoured by the left. Think of Tony Blair's big public spending pledges and New Deal for communities. We need to do both. We need to both empower and capitalise communities. And we need to do so not just through individuals, but also through collectives. We need to empower communities as a whole rather than just the individual people within them. What might this look like as an approach? Well, earlier this year in January, we set out a whole playbook of policies that we thought embodied this approach, the politics of belonging. There are three that I want to highlight for you today. The first is something we call Year to Serve. Now, this would be a national scheme in which young people would be paid a real wage to go work in civic roles in their community. That might be tutoring, it might be social care, it might be planting trees to save the environment. They do that for a year, just as young people in America do through AmeriCorps or similar schemes in France and Germany provide. But this country, the United Kingdom, has never had a similar scheme. The pandemic is the perfect moment to introduce a scheme where young people, the most socially conscious generation in the post-war period, can be deployed to fix some of our deepest social problems. Another policy might be radically extending community land trusts by giving communities the right to demand land from the local authority in order to set up and build using a community land trust when there's not enough affordable housing available. We know that local authorities are sitting on large amounts of land that is there to be developed. We know that communities, through community land trusts, can build at great speed with beautiful buildings that communities love because they've been involved in designing and developing them. The final idea that we put forward was the idea of a civic sabbatical. This would entail giving people the right to draw down a year of their pension early and in turn delay their retirement by a year, but to do so in middle age and to do so to volunteer or to start a community business. This would be both empowering people to take control of some of their pension assets, but also capitalizing them, giving them back time at their peak of their lives in middle age when they can contribute to their communities in a way that lots of middle-aged people don't perhaps feel they can do. Those are just three ideas. We put forward many more. But the intention, as I hope you'll see, was to both empower and capitalize people and communities. I'd love to hear your own ideas, because especially after the last year, we need to come together to drive this agenda through government. We have, I think, moved past the what, the problems with our social fabric, the why, some of the wider economic and social trends of the last few years. We now need to move on to the how. We need to understand what we are going to do in practical terms to repair the social fabric of our communities. How can we repair the ties that bind us together at local level, both as individuals and as groups? How can we rebuild some of those institutions which in the past have been forums and platforms for networking and for people to work together for the good of their community? How can organizations like the lottery close the funding gap that exists in some communities which are not capitalized enough, but perhaps have the most need in those communities? And how can charities work better with communities and with local government to repair our social fabric? How can we bring together different actors across the system and not just solely look up to government or look down to communities to do this on their own? Those are some of the questions that I think this conference, Communities Can, needs to answer. And that's some of the evidence that we at Onward are bringing to bear on the debate. I look forward to engaging with all of you in the coming weeks, months and years. And I very much hope that we can all work together to build back better after this terrible year. Thank you very much.